Good evening, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, Ms. Mayor, Ms. Bauer, you'd like to get us underway?
Thank
So
you.
call the meeting to order. If you want
And
to
I will read the preamble.
Thank you. Great. Thank you.
A public hearing is a statutory requirement under Section 464 of the Local Government Act and must be held before third reading of a community plan, land use contract amendment, heritage bylaw, heritage designation bylaw, or heritage revitalization agreement. During a public hearing, council acts in a quasi-judicial role for the purpose of allowing persons who believe their interest in property is affected by the bylaw, permit, or other matter to make representations to council either orally or by written submission, or add comments to elaborate upon correspondence that they may have already been presented to council concerning the bylaws. It is important to note that council is not in the position to receive any additional information on the bylaws following the public hearing, as dictated by case law. The hearing procedure involves an explanation from the Community Development Division on the purpose of the proposed bylaw and to hear from the individuals regarding the bylaw. In order to ensure that all interested parties have a reasonable opportunity to be heard, speakers are requested to keep the representations as brief and succinct as possible and no longer than 5 minutes, excluding time required for questions from council. Speakers will be asked to state their name, neighborhood, and city for the record, and if referring to prepared remarks, to submit the copies of these to the township clerk. Decorum must be maintained at all times. This includes refraining from applause, booing, and heckling. To assist with the large number of speakers, individuals must advise the township clerk and sign the speakers list prior to commencement of the public hearing. The names on the speakers list will be read out during the hearing. Individuals who have already addressed council and wish to add further submissions will wait until the people that have not yet addressed council have had the opportunity to speak. All submissions and speakers list are considered part of the public record. Council members should not express their views nor debate the bylaws, but may question speakers to clarify particular points in the submissions. Council may consider third reading or third reading and final adoption at this meeting or at the next regular council meeting to be held April 3rd, 2023 in the same room.
Great. Thank you. Let's move on here. Get it only one item on the agenda. Get a motion to move the agenda. Moved by Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Bailey. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Anyone opposed? Carries unanimously. Mr. Richardson, C1.
Thank you, Worship. The subject official community plan amendment bylaw 5854, streamside protection and enhancement development areas included, the subject official community plan amendment bylaw 5854 pertains to the streamside protection and enhancement development permit areas included in Schedule 3 of the Township's official community plan. The proposed amendments generally update legislative references and clarify qualified environmental professional determination of a non-regulated Class C watercourse consistent with senior government legislation and processes. Staff recommend council consideration of official community plan amendment bylaw 5854. Your worship, consistent with legislative requirements, notice of this hearing were placed in the March 2nd and March 9th editions of the local newspaper. 14 written submissions have been received, and there are 8 individuals noted on the speakers list. The first 3 are, and apologies for my pronunciation in advance, Marley St Pierre, Cheryl Wiens, and Lynn Perrin.
Great. Marley St Pierre, come forward, please. Thank you. Great. So just trying to turn your mic on. Not a touch screen. There we go. Here you go. Go ahead.
Good
please.
evening, Mayor
Thank you.
Woodward, councillors and staff. My name is Marley St Pierre. I live at 20657 91B Avenue, Walnut Grove, Langley, and I've lived there in Langley for 23 years. I'm a volunteer member of the Langley Field Naturalists and the Yorkson Watershed Enhancement Society. I'm also a kindergarten teacher at LEAP, which is Langley's Environmental Awareness Program. It's a public school choice program where children learn in the local parks and the community spaces in Langley. And protection of the environment is something I value highly. When I read the proposed amendments to the Streamside Protection Enhancement Bylaw in Langley's official community plan, I felt concern, some anger, and I was filled with questions. As a volunteer streamkeeper, I spend my free time trying to protect and enhance streamsides and creeks. As an environmental educator, I teach children about their responsibility to be a good relative to all their relations, plants, the trees, the animals, the air, the water, their classmates, and other community members. And the wording changes in this bylaw seem to de-emphasize the importance of following all levels of government regulations to protect streams and wetlands and riparian areas. I ask, why are these changes deemed necessary? And what is the motivation for them? The wording, for example, is less specific when describing all the types of watercourses that may require protection. Thirdly, the wording changes replace the specification of a qualified environmental professional with the more generic words qualified professional. Language matters. We know that every ambiguous word can be used in favor of development and in the interest of making more profit. We also know that language can set a tone for a culture of respect for the law and the ethics of environmental protection. I'm also here to remind you that all the streamside protection and enhancement bylaw is there to protect those whose interests are often not represented in political and economic decisions. The fish, the trees, the water, the birds, the ecosystem, and the children whose future health and quality of life depends on good decisions made by political representation today. Every day I walk along the trails of Walnut Grove, and I'm grateful for the bylaws that protected the streamside there. When my students play at the clean, natural river's edge in Williams Park and are able to appreciate the crayfish and the salmon and the eagles and the beautiful cedar and the beautiful maples, I'm grateful for the forethought to protect this natural area as a park for all to enjoy. I urge you, Mayor Woodward and councillors, to send this bylaw back to staff for a rewrite, this time in consultation with watershed protection experts and with the goal of strengthening the language to protect and enhance streamsides and waterways, and not with the goal of streamlining development. Thank you.
Thank you. I have one question from council. Please, Councillor Richter.
Yes, thank you, Ms. St. Pierre. You sent an email last week where you referenced City of Surrey's development permit guidelines that actually cite BC Regulation 376-204 as amended, that it would take precedent. Is that what you're recommending in this case too?
I read through it and it seemed like a good idea to me, but I just think it would definitely be something dangerous, unusual for Langley to have wording that would say their recommendations could supersede other higher levels of government, such as Department of Fisheries and Oceans and Ministry of Environment.
Okay, great. Thank you for your letter.
Thank you. Cheryl Wiens. Go ahead, yeah.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Cheryl Wiens, and I'm a resident of the Willoughby neighborhood. I have several concerns regarding the proposed amendments to Schedule 3 of the Township's official community plan. My concerns range from the model Schedule 3 is built on, to the specific amendments being proposed, to the way these amendments have been brought forward to today's public hearing. First, my concerns with the model. Schedule 3 is built on a professional reliance model. In this model, developers choose and pay the qualified environmental professionals, or QEPs, responsible for assessing and reporting on the proposed development activities to regulators. The provincial government is well aware of the many flaws with this model. A 2018 report on the review of professional reliance in BC specifically cites a, quote, long history of issues with poor QEP performance, end quote. The kind of poor performance that led to environmental disasters like the mine tailings pond breach at Mount Poly. If we are to go ahead with this flawed model in the township, there must be greater oversight. Greater oversight could look like increased monitoring by qualified bylaw enforcement officers and/or the creation of a roster of QEPs approved by the township. Second, my concerns with the specific amendments being proposed, and there are a few. Now, as flawed as professional reliance on QEPs is, I am concerned that the proposed amendments do not actually use the term qualified environmental professional as defined in the Water Sustainability Act and the Riparian Area Protection Regulation. Instead, they use the term qualified professional, which is not a term defined in any provincial legislation that I'm aware of. I'm also concerned the proposed amendments remove ditches from the definition of a stream. Ditches are used to manage water in rural areas and often connect with watercourses. The current Schedule 3 definition of a stream is inclusive of ditches, as is the province's riparian areas protection regulation. Furthermore, the township's own climate action strategy sets out to increase knowledge and awareness of the benefits of green infrastructure, making specific mention of ditches. I would like to see ditches remain in the definition in Schedule 3. Next, the proposed amendments create a new class of watercourse in the Township of Langley. I am curious if staff intend to review Map 11 given this new classification. Is there a length of time after which staff must review Map 11, or will we rely on developer-paid consultants or qualified professionals for this service? My final concern with the proposed amendments relates to what isn't being amended. I have corresponded with staff about the DFO letter referred to in Schedule 3, Section 2.3.2, which authorizes destructive works in Gloucester. Staff acknowledged that the letter expired in 2015, and it is my view that this clause should be removed so that any potential this letter has to circumvent streamside protections in Gloucester could be removed along with it. Finally, my concerns with the way these amendments have been brought forward. To my knowledge, these amendments were developed without public engagement and with very little notice for the limited public input we're able to provide tonight. There are many residents in the Township of Langley who are not developer funded and who have dedicated significant portions of their lives to protecting and enhancing our streams. They include arborists, registered professional biologists, professors of climatology, public policy analysts, environmental educators, and program coordinators, and so on. The Township of Langley would be wise to include these people and all members of the public in any process of updating its streamside protections. Given these concerns, I ask that you refer the streamside protection and enhancement clarification amendments back to staff with direction for greater public engagement and to address the many legitimate concerns I'm sure will be raised here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Not seeing any questions from council. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Next speaker, Lynn Perrin. I also apologize if I don't pronounce some of these correctly.
Good evening, Council. I'll first introduce myself. I'm Lynn Perrin, and I am currently living in Abbotsford, but I spent many years living in Gardner, and actually right across the street from the Gloucester Industrial Park. I started protecting the West Creek headwaters since the late 70s. And I moved away for a while, and about 6 years ago, I was asked by the Kwantlen First Nation to become re-engaged. I was actually at the meetings, the Central Fraser Valley Regional District meetings when Gloucester was being proposed. Literally, I was there. Literally, I was listened as Gloucester committed to a green space, which is the golf course lands. And I could swear an affidavit to that effect. I have done considerable research in this regard. I am a Master of Public Policy, and I am very adept at freedom of information, access to information. So I've accessed Township of Langley files. In this matter, I've also accessed the Department of Fisheries and Oceans files, and I have downloaded, I've asked the clerk to download the fisheries permit document and related documents there because I think that they are very relevant in this particular matter. Shoot, it's page 109, I think it is. Just to remind you that watercourses in BC are Crown. They're Crown-owned. They're not owned by the Township of Langley. They're not owned by a development company. There should be some, maybe we have to make it a bit smaller. What this document, anyway, they're not owned by a developer. They're not owned by any private landowners. They are owned by the people of British Columbia. And I sent this council an email a couple of days ago cautioning you about being in breach of trust. You have fiduciary duties to us, and you will not be fulfilling your fiduciary duties to us if you pass this bylaw in its current form. Now, one thing that this document says is that the golf course lands were compensation lands. They were lands in compensation for all of the harm that was done by Gloucester to the wetlands and West Creek. It says right in the fisheries permit document. It also, there was a letter from Gloucester in 1999 at White, EnviroWest, that said that the golf course lands would be compensation for all of the harm done on the water course in the development. And so, and it says, this document says that it is to be the case for the entire time of Gloucester Industrial Estates. There's no deadline on it. There's no deadline that says, oh, when we've run out of industrial property, we're going to come back and take the compensation lands. So I don't know if you have even been given this information. I don't know if your staff has this historic information. I know that I've sent numerous emails and copied mayor and council about this, including this caution about breach of trust and your fiduciary duty. So please exercise your fiduciary duty and do not pass this bylaw in its current form.
Thank you. Next speaker, Linda Lightfoot.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you tonight. Thanks, Mandy. My name's Linda Lightfoot. I live at 5458 272 Street in Langley, and I have quite a few concerns about the proposed amendment to Bylaw 5854. I feel rather than ensuring increased protection and enhancement of the streams and watercourses and acknowledging their value in mitigating the negative effects of climate change, the proposal creates a variety of loopholes that have a very opposite effect by removing much of the existing regulatory oversight and prioritizing the interests of private developers. The three main areas that I have concern are following, and I won't get into a lot of detail because I know you've received a lot of information on this, but one is the overarching powers being given to a QP, generally paid by and working exclusively for the developer, and the fact that his or her opinion on various findings would be binding on the township. The authority of said QP to reclassify or declassify watercourses or even designate them as non-registered C-class streams if they are deemed to be an impediment in achieving the goal of the developer is a problem. It's a huge conflict of interest and I feel could create some legal issues along the way. The timing of the granting of this power to a QP is suspect, in my view, when protecting our natural assets is a top priority, at least publicly in all the levels of government. This proposal coincides with a development application that would seriously negatively impact the headwaters of an important salmon-bearing stream, the unexplained disappearance of all the beaver in the area, and the very recent vigorous flood mitigation activity that's left the water levels in the ponds and the wetlands drastically low, right at a time when the coho smolts in the ponds are ready to gather, usually mid-April, to head to the ocean, excuse me, and when the migratory bird nesting season starts. The changes are fundamentally at odds with the Metro Vancouver's 2050 plan, which articulates a number of strategies to protect our vulnerable ecosystems and to reduce the negative aspects of climate change through the retention and protection of our wetlands, our freshwater, and our bogs. The proposal doesn't even align with our own climate action strategy, which has as some of its goals protecting our watercourses, wetlands, and biodiverse ecosystems, maintaining and enhancing our natural assets and green space, and preparing the community to better adapt to a changing climate well into the future. Just as a footnote, about 4 days ago in the Vancouver Sun, there was a comment that developers of large condominium and apartment complexes are coming to the conclusion that they can be built in a greener fashion if balconies are eliminated. So we are looking at density and using up our green space at a time when it's going to be even more valuable to the residents coming into an already crowded community. The changing of the definition of a stream by introducing the word natural is very concerning, as it potentially excludes ditches and modified or constructed watercourses and wetlands that have existed in the township for decades. Could you as a result of or to accommodate prior development activity. Can they both go? Oh yeah, thanks a lot. Okay, these photos illustrate the problem of arbitrarily changing the definition of a stream instead of adopting that of the riparian area protection regulation. They show a portion of the wetlands in Gloucester Estates, which are formed by natural ponds, West Creek itself, which is a red-coated salmon-bearing stream, man-made retention ponds, channels dug to interconnect these ponds, and a confluence of a natural upwelling of water that forms a lot of the source of West Creek, as well as the natural creek tributaries themselves. The result is a functioning wetland doing exactly what it's supposed to do. It's providing nutrient and habitat for our dwindling salmon stocks. It's creating a biodiverse atmosphere and environment for cutthroat and steelhead trout and other wildlife. It acts as a master of carbon capture and storage, and it's offsetting the heat sink effect that's created by the surrounding areas of concrete, tar and gravel roofs, and acres of asphalt. With the proposed stream definition, what protection, if any, would an area like this have if encroaching development threatens its very existence? In conclusion, with heat domes and atmospheric rivers in our recent past and almost certainly in our future, we have to consider the value of our natural assets and ecosystems in our decision-making and in our land use policies. I don't believe that this proposal does that, and if we can't find a way to clearly demonstrate in dollars and cents the value of these assets, we risk losing them. I respectfully request that you reject the proposed amendments that are on the table. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have a question from council.
Pardon me?
I have a question from council. Councilor Richter, go ahead.
Yeah, I actually have two questions. I'll start
I'll
with your
try.
last statement. You said reject the amendments, all of them, or are
The
there?
proposed amendment, yes, I would say as presented to the public, the ones that were up for change, I would say yes. I don't think any of them do anything to put us further ahead in terms of looking after our streams, and some of them seem to me to deliberately get them out of any oversight from other levels of government that would have an opportunity to exert their authority.
Okay, so in your opinion, there's nothing worth saving in what's in front of us right now?
Not in the changes that were being made. That's what I'm addressing, is the actual amendment, sort of point by point. I didn't look at the entire, bill, bylaw as it's written, but the changes that were made to me have a negative impact. They're not putting us further down the path to looking after our ecosystems and preparing for climate change.
Okay, and the other question that I wanted to ask, you mentioned unexplained disappearance of beavers. And
Well, this is
low
an
water
ongoing thing
levels.
with us in Gloucester. There have been 5, I know they've been culling the beaver, and when I talked to them this time about the fact that there just haven't been any for weeks and weeks, I'm told that they're not trapping them. My fear was they might be poisoning them because there's a huge stand of Japanese knotweed that is a builder's nightmare, and I know there are ways of poisoning that to get rid of it. And the beaver do eat the knotweed, but I've been told that's not the case either. But normally, if the beaver dams are lowered in the winter, the beaver don't have the energy or the interest in building them up. They're hibernating, and that allows the water as they're in the flooding season to seep down into the ponds. If you take them down in the spring, they normally start building them back up again. And there haven't been any beavers, and they're nature's engineers. They've been managing that for a lot longer than we've been here. And I don't know where they're going, but it just seemed a bit of a concerted effort to no beaver, no wetland, developer leaning over our shoulder, and now bylaws that are making it a little easier for them to act outside the realm of the original protective measures by the other two levels of government.
Okay.
Call me a cynic, but I've lived there for 20 years, and this is the first time we've seen that kind of drastic mitigation for flooding.
And has the water come down, the water level
It's
come down?
coming up a little bit, but you can see on this, the coho salmon pool in that pond that's sort of at the back there, and that's being fed by all of these streams. The other problem is there's a salmon spawning ground further down on the other side of 56th, which a bunch of volunteers, myself included, worked with the Salmon Enhancement Group, got a grant to reestablish it as a spawning ground. Well, when we just willy-nilly release the water, even though it's supposed to just seep down, this has the effect of just washing out all the effects of our work. So it's not good, and yet every day Canada Nature now has a beautiful video of how we're to respect wetlands and, you know, all the wonderful things they do for us. So I think we have to sit up and take notice.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Next speaker is Nigel Easton and Nina Shaw.
Thanks, Wendy.
Hi, I'm Nina Shaw. I'm with Nikamakala Enhancement Society. So our society is a community-based volunteer-run organization that operates a DFO-regulated hatchery in the upper reaches of the Nikamakal River. For over 30 years, we have raised Chinook, chum, and coho salmon fry for release into the river system. We collect boundary-based salmon when they spawn in the river during the fall and take eggs from them to raise in the hatchery. We also collect spawning salmon to take eggs for DFO to be raised at their Inch Creek hatchery. We release approximately 225,000 fry every spring, which includes the DFO hatchery raised fry, and these fry are released into various parts of the river system. So over the course of our existence, we have released about 7.5 million fry, including the DFO fry. So we have some concerns about the changes being proposed by Bylaw 5854. So the first thing, the term, the word ditch and brook are being dropped from its existing definition of stream, and instead what is being proposed is the adoption of the definition of stream in the Water Sustainability Act. The Riparian Areas Protection Regulation, however, includes in its definition of stream, and I quote, ditch, whether or not usually containing water that is connected by surface flow to a watercourse or a body of water. We would like to point out that ditches can be important habitat for salmon. Many ditches throughout Langley are observed to contain salmon fry and even spawners. In fact, our society, the hatchery, has collected spawners from ditches for the hatchery operation. So the question would be, why not include ditch in the definition of stream? And why not include the definition of stream, which is in the provincial riparian areas protection regulation, as does the City of Surrey? And another question, shouldn't the definition of stream under the riparian areas protection regulation prevail over that under the Water Sustainability Act in determining whether or not a given watercourse meets the definition of a Class B as opposed to a Class C stream, as it does in the City of Surrey? The other area of concern the amendment proposes that a proponent can request reclassification of a watercourse on the basis of an assessment by a qualified professional. So is there a system in place to suggest the types of qualified professionals required to do such assessments? And is there a system in place to verify the qualifications of professionals who would be conducting assessments and providing reports, as does the City of Surrey? So there have been a lot of issues that have been raised by other groups, and we share many of those issues, many of those concerns. So it cannot be overstated the importance of having the right regulatory tools in place to protect the streams that make up the river systems in Langley. If we protect our streams, rivers, wetlands, and other bodies of water, we can continue to have salmon and the numerous other aquatic species, as well as a variety of birds, eagles, heron, and waterfowl, and much more, and other wildlife, which make Langley a place where we want to live and a place that others want to visit. Thank you.
Thank you. I have don't go anywhere. I have a question from council.
Yeah.
Councilor Richter.
Can you just go back, please, and explain what you meant by the classification B versus classification C?
Yeah, so Class A would mean that a stream has salmon all year round, would be fish bearing, salmon bearing. Class B would be some of the year. And Class C would be that there would be two types of Class C, that it provides nutrients to fish further downstream, and the other where it wouldn't. And so the riparian areas protection regulation has a more, does specifically include ditches, and ditches may not contain water throughout the year, but they would during our wetter months, and salmon often make their way there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Next speaker is Britt Gardner.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Britt Gardner. I'm a resident of Fort Langley. The periodic need to update and clarify streamside protection legislation is understandable. First and foremost, amendments to our streamside protection and enhancement bylaw should strengthen existing protections and prioritize long-term health of our ecosystems. However, the proposed amendment includes problematic definitions, improper delegation of authority, and failure to recognize the impacts of climate change, which I will outline briefly. It is my view that these fundamental weaknesses negatively impact the public interest and undermine the very protection the bylaw was designed to provide. I believe that consideration should bring Council to the conclusion that this amendment should be rejected. First, the redefinition of the word stream. The proposed definition of stream removes reference to ditches widely used in rural areas. It also adds the word natural, which potentially excludes constructed or modified watercourses and wetlands that exist today as a result of or to accommodate prior human development activity. I suggest that the Riparian Areas Protection Regulation, RAPR, definition of stream is the one we should be using if we are to deviate from our current definition. The RAPR definition includes ditches and does not include the word natural. The proposed narrowed definition of stream appears to benefit the interests of land speculators and developers rather than improve streamside protection and enhancement in the Township of Langley. Second, the amendment would allow for a developer hired qualified professional, loosely defined in the bylaw, to now unilaterally impose upon the township a different watercourse classification and/or map for the developer to rely on for the development application. To whose governing standards their reports would be prepared is left open to interpretation. Should this developer-hired consultant determine that a watercourse on a property meets the definition of a non-regulated Class C watercourse, then this designation, a result of their singular professional opinion, would immediately become legally binding upon the township, as per Section 5.7, even if the watercourse has been given a different designation from a different professional or from the township itself. This creates a scenario where the development application must be allowed to proceed without engaging in any further streamside approval process and without any possibility of township intervention, even if there is a disagreement with the consultant's assessment. This is an egregious example of deregulation in the Township of Langley. If voted into law, this council will have removed from democratic oversight a critical component of environmental stewardship and security at a local level, instead handing it over to private developers and their paid consultants. Last but not least, why now? Langley's 2021 Climate Action Strategy recommends the review of streamside development guidelines with future climate projections. However, this proposed amendment makes no reference to climate action or mitigation whatsoever. To put this proposed amendment in context, there is a $100 million plus industrial rezoning application in stream right now within Gloucester Industrial Estates, which is built right on top of West Creek Headwaters, one of BC's identified 15 most sensitive streams. That application could rely on this very amendment to maximize private profit at the expense of adjacent wetlands and habitat. Mayor and Council opens every meeting with verbal recognition that we are on unceded territories of Kwantlen, Katzie, Matsqui, and Semiahmoo First Nations. There is no reference to consultation with First Nations for this proposed bylaw amendment, which grants developer-hired consultants the authority to unilaterally exempt themselves from regulations and change watercourse classifications without public input. Has such deference and delegation of local authority in streamside development applications to developer consultants ever been afforded by local government to our First Nations? Rather than developed through the lens of climate justice and robust public consultation, the proposed bylaw amendment has been written through the lens of developer interests and deregulation. In light of the proposed amendment's definitional gaps, weaknesses, risks, and omissions, I urge you, Mayor and Council, to reject them. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Toby Mazzaros. You're going to draw? Okay. Next speaker is James Loffler.
Good evening, Mayor and Council.
It'll catch you. You don't have to worry about it. It'll get your voice.
Thank you. My name is James Loeffler. I am a young but longtime resident of Willoughby and Yorkson, a local student at KPU. Hello again, Councilwoman Richter. And a enthusiast of local streams and wildlife. To start, as was stated before, I have issues with the definition in the current Act of qualified professionals. Any individual theoretically within this definition could be a person who is hired by a landowner or in favor of property developers could easily be named and nominated without proper oversight by the government. I also have an issue with, apologies, I didn't pre-write this. In a time when we are seeing increased population growth in Langley, the destruction of green spaces and public spaces is a concerning prospect. Additionally, young workers like me rely on public infrastructure, specifically buses, the ideal future SkyTrain, to get to work. And as a resident of Willoughby who's worked for a long while and gone to school in Fort Langley, I have seen flooding destroy my ability to get there on a daily basis. Getting rid of ditches, whether or not they have salmon, that provide stormwater management and water flow overall, especially as we are dealing with an increase in weather fluctuation, may have a large and devastating effect on a young worker's ability to get to work every day. Same with students, same with anyone who relies on public infrastructure to get to where they're going. Thank you.
Thank you. So that concludes the speakers list, I believe, Mr. Richardson. Is that correct?
That's correct, Your Worship.
So with that, we'll take any submissions from the public. I'll call for the first time. Are there any further submissions from the public? Please come forward.
Sorry,
Did you have more information to present?
Mayor and Council, there was one thing I forgot to...
That's no problem at all. Please come down.
Yeah, thank you. There was just one other thing I forgot to refer to.
Okay.
And that is that the Fisheries Act. I assume that Council respects that the laws of Canada and the laws of BC override the laws of the township. So we have the Fisheries Act, and the Fisheries Act defines fish habitat. And the Gloucester properties, the conservation areas are fish habitat. And the Fisheries Act protects fish habitat. Not only is it habitat for spawning and for nursery, but it's also habitat for nutrients to fish, both in the area itself, but also downstream. So again, I just hope that council defers to the senior government requirements in this regard.
I have a
Thank
question.
you.
I have another clarification from council. Councilor Richter?
Yeah, so your reference to the Fisheries Act and their definition of fish habitat.
Yes.
Is that something that you think should be in this bylaw? That we adopt the Fisheries Act definition of fish habitat?
I think it would be a really good idea, because I think it would inform anyone who wants to work around streams or in streams, what the expectations are for them. And, you know, it might save a lot of time and trouble for council. I'm not for council, but especially for staff. You know, the clearer you can make a policy, the less time your staff have to spend explaining requirements to people who want to work, you know, develop land. And another thing that I mentioned a couple of council meetings ago is just, I think it's really important for any level of government to consider their capacity to enforce their bylaws. I think, you know, we all hope that everyone is going to, you know, respect a bylaw, but regrettably that isn't the case. And that means time and expense of staff time to enforce the bylaws. So anyway, that's just something I've observed a lot lately. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So do that again. Is there any further submissions from the public? Please come forward.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Nigel Easton. I'm president of the Nikomakil Enhancement Society. And a question to Council. From what I understand of reading all the bylaws, that the provincial government has jurisdiction over the Riparian Act. So I'm questioning how you have the right to change that when it is actually a provincial government mandate. If you would like to answer that, maybe?
Unfortunately, within the public hearing process, we're here to receive submissions from the public.
Okay.
And then when we consider the bylaw, we'll account for all of the submissions, including your question.
Good. Anyway, please look at that. It doesn't seem right that you can do this.
I understand. Thank you. Is there any further submissions from the public? Are there any further submissions from the public? And for a third time, are there any further submissions from the public? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing on item C1. I think with that, unless there's a motion, not seeing one, I think we'll call termination. Moved by Councillor Martins, seconded by Councillor Bailey. All those in favor of termination? Anyone opposed? Public hearing is hereby terminated. The bylaw will be considered by council again at its next regular meeting on April 3rd. Thank you very much. Can I get that letter back from this? That's my only copy. Can I get that letter back, the one that I marked up? You see how it was worded? Right?